Dear viewer, this video is available in Hindi as well. If you wish to watch it, please visit our Hindi YouTube channel, Drishti IAS. For your convenience, the link for this video in Hindi has been provided in the description below.
Hello friends, welcome to a new episode of Drishti IAS Editorial Analysis. In this editorial analysis, we do three things. First of all, we link the editorial to the UPSC syllabus. Secondly, we try to understand the key points of the editorial. And thirdly, if any key concepts have come in the editorial and are important from exam point of view, we also discuss that. So let us begin today's editorial analysis. We have taken today's editorial from Indian Express and it has come on 18th of June. The title of the editorial is The Red Line, and it says that India must keep its focus on the primary objective to restore status quo ante on the northern frontiers. So it deals with the recent border clash between India and China, which took a violent turn on 15th of June. So let us look at its linkage with the syllabus. It links directly with GS paper 2, where we have international relations. And under this it links with India and its neighborhood relations because it deals with India-China relations. So after establishing the link with the syllabus, now let us look at its key points. So here in this map we can see the India-China border, which is known as line of actual control. And it is divided into three sectors. We have the western sector, we have the central sector and the eastern sector. In the eastern sector, it corresponds to McMahon line as far as Arunachal is concerned. And the central sector is relatively peaceful. But since May 2020, there have been Chinese incursions seen in area around Sikkim and in the western sector near Aksai Chin. So here the point of conflict has been Nakula in Sikkim. And in the western sector, there have been 4-5 points of conflict. In this map, we can see more clearly which are the points of conflict in the western sector. The clash on 15th June took place in the Galwan Valley, and here 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives because they were outnumbered by the Chinese forces. And there is no verification of the casualties on the Chinese side, but it is also being said that around 45 Chinese soldiers were killed in the conflict, but there is no independent verification of this claim. And this incident at the Galwan Valley happened when the Indian forces went to make sure that the disengagement from the Chinese side was taking place as per what was agreed between the two sides in the talks on June 6th and on June 10th. There was a tent put up by the Chinese army, and when the Indian troops objected to the placement of that tent, it resulted in a scuffle between the two sides where the Chinese soldiers used stones and batons with nails to attack the Indian troops, which also retaliated, but the Indian troops were outnumbered by the Chinese soldiers. And here we can see the timeline of the conflict. So on May 5th and 6th, Indian and Chinese troops scuffled at Pangong Tso Lake in Ladakh, resulting in injuries in large numbers on both sides. Then on May 9th, clash between the troops happened at Nakula in North Sikkim. And on May 18, China accused India of trespass and building illegal infrastructure on line of actual control. Whereas on 21st of May, India said that the Chinese troops were hindering the normal Indian army patrol within its territory of the line of actual control. And on May 27, China said that the border situation was stable and controllable. And two dialogues between the two sides at higher level happened on June 6th and June 10th. And in fact, the June 6th meeting was at Corps Commander level. And here 5 areas of conflict were identified, and both sides also agreed on limited disengagement from some of these areas. And these points were Pangong Tso, Patrolling Point 14-15 and 17A and Chusul. Whereas the June 10th talk was at Major General level, and in this also there was consensus to take actions to ease the situation along the border. So what happened on June 15 and 16 was very unfortunate, and it was not on the expected lines, as both sides were expecting that after these talks disengagement will take place and the situation will return to normal in some time. And this kind of violence resulting in so many deaths on both sides has happened after 45 years on LAC. The last such incident had happened in 1975 at a place called Tulungla in Arunachal Pradesh, where 4 Assam Rifle soldiers were martyred when they were attacked by the Chinese forces. Now let us look at the key points of the editorial. So the editorial says that whatever has happened on June 15th it has led to a red line being crossed by China. And as the details are emerging about the 15th June encounter in the Galwan Valley, there is a growing national outrage at the martyrdom of Indian troops, and the whole nation is united against China. On its part, Chinese side has put the blame on India, and it has said that it was the Indian troops who had transgressed and come into its side of the territory. But the Indian Foreign Minister and the Ministry of External Affairs has made it very clear that it was the People's Liberation Army of China that tried to alter the status quo and was responsible for this casualties on both sides. And the Foreign Minister, while talking with his counterpart in China, also stated that if there was more responsible approach from China, then the casualties could have been avoided. And here we should know that S. Jaishankar is the Foreign Minister of India and the Foreign Minister of China is Wang Yi. And the editorial says that whatever has happened reflects the Chinese strategy on this border dispute with India. And the Chinese strategy is to blame Indian army for the recent confrontation. Secondly, to threaten India with further escalation if it doesn't disengage. And thirdly, offering talks to defuse the situation. And the editorial says that this is a classic Chinese ploy which combines military aggression with political moderation. So on the one hand, China is trying to intimidate India, and on the other hand, it is trying to show that it is always ready for talks, but only on its terms. And the editorial also says that to deal with such Chinese strategy requires a sophisticated Indian response as well. And on its part, Prime Minister Modi has said that India desires peace and de-escalation, but it is fully determined to vigorously respond to any provocation on the border and to save every inch of its territory. Editorial also says that there is a lot of anger in India and the people are wanting some kind of retaliatory action. But it says that reactions based on anger, however legitimate, cannot be part of any sensible Indian strategy as far as dealing with China is concerned. Because India cannot equate China and Pakistan, because there are very different circumstances involved with both these countries. And India also has this power differential in its favor when it deals with Pakistan. But the same is not true when India is dealing with China, which is a major military and global power. Also, the editorial says that any rash military response to the Galwan incident can lead to military escalation at multiple points on the contested line of actual control, which will not be in favor of India and nor in favor of China, because it will have huge economic costs for both the countries as well as political consequences. But at the same time, it does not mean that India should accept the new facts on the ground which are being created by China. And here we should know a term which is called salami tactics, which are being used by China. And salami tactics refer to making incremental inroads and cutting something into smaller pieces. So something like that is happening as far as India-China border is concerned. So every time China is trying to gain some portion of the territory by making an intrusion and then saying that this territory was always under its occupation. So something like that is being tried by China and India must guard against it. And the editorial says that the main political objective of India should be to restore status quo ante that prevailed before China's incursion in April 2020. And for achieving this, India should follow a threefold strategy. First of all, India must show a political will to escalate military confrontation if it becomes necessary. India should not shy away from it, but India should not force this. Secondly, there has to be a demonstration of national unity and resolve to bear the economic and political cost of any such escalation. And thirdly, there has to be a commitment to a sustained dialogue to complete the process of disengagement and making sure that the Chinese forces go back to their positions, as was the situation in April 2020. Finally, the editorial says that India's message must be clear to both the domestic audience as well as to the international audience that it will do whatever it takes to restore the status quo ante on line of actual control, and it will not allow China to grab any more of its territory. So this was all in the key points of the editorial. Now let us look at the key concepts. In key concepts, let us look at India-China relations and what this recent border conflict holds for both India and China as far as their bilateral relations are concerned. So with its aggression in the Galwan Valley, China has crossed a threshold and pushed relations with India to a dangerous low. Also, the Chinese soldiers used the opportunity of a negotiated withdrawal operation to viciously attack Indian soldiers, which has led to a lot of resentment and anger against the Chinese action. And this incident led to the first Indian military casualties along the line of actual control in 45 years. So this was always a matter of pride that India and China border, though disputed, had not seen any military casualty over 45 years. But now this is no longer true. And also this incident reflects a dramatic shift in the Chinese strategy, and it also requires India to re-evaluate its position vis-a-vis China. Now we can see a more assertive China, which is under the leadership of Xi Jinping. We see a China which is more assertive and which is not following the international rules and norms while dealing with other countries. And this can be seen in the way it has violated international norms and laws in the South China Sea. Also, it can be seen in its predatory economic practices as far as Belt and Road Initiative is concerned, where many countries have fallen prey to the Chinese debt trap. And also it can be seen in the encroachment upon sovereignty and territorial integrity of its neighbors, and where Japan and India stand out as two examples. Also it can be seen in the repressive policies which Chinese government is pursuing at home in its provinces in Xinjiang and Tibet, and also with the autonomy situation in Hong Kong, where the autonomy of Hong Kong is being eroded step by step. As far as China-India relations are concerned, China wants to limit India's power and ambition, and it wants India to be limited to only South Asia. It does not want India to rival it as a global power. Also, it wants to impose costs on India for deepening ties with USA. And it has been more and more concerned about India's border infrastructure upgradation, especially along the line of actual control, which is threatening the Chinese advantage, because China has very good border infrastructure on its side of the LAC, and it does not want India to develop similar border infrastructure to maintain its superiority. Now India must also respond to the Chinese threat, but it must do it strategically and not emotionally. First of all, India should make sure that status quo ante is restored at the borders. And for this, India has to display both military strength at the border, and also it has to use diplomacy to make China understand that there will be heavy cost on the relations between the two countries, impinging on all spheres. Also, India must try to inflict costs on China in other theaters like business and trade. But at the same time, India also has to make sure that these conflicts remain within limits. So it has to be done strategically. Also, India must try to mobilize international opinion to expose the Chinese aggression and create pressure on China. Also, it is important that India reconsiders its geopolitical posture in light of the recent conflict with China. It has to take a strong position on Tibet. It must make it clear to China that if China indulges in such theatrics, that India will also raise the Tibet issue. Also, India should make its partnership with US more strong. And India should also not shy away from this Quad grouping and try to make it a more permanent arrangement. At the same time, India should also re-examine its trade, technology and investment ties with China, which are heavily in favor of China, and India has not benefited much. So this needs to be re-examined and corrective steps need to be taken. Also, India should ramp up its military modernization to narrow the gap between India and China in terms of military strength. Also, India should prepare for a two-front situation, which is more and more likely as India has Pakistan on one side and China on the other side. Also, India has to invest more in South Asia and try to have friendly governments, because what China has been doing is that with almost all the neighboring countries of India, it has tried to develop better relations and also feeding anti-India sentiments. So India must guard against it and try to make sure that it has a friendly neighborhood and does not allow China to gain inroads into its neighborhood. Finally, India has to display both strength and wisdom in dealing with an adversary like China. So this was all in the key concepts. Now let us look at the kind of questions that can be asked in prelims and mains. So in prelims, you can be asked about location-based questions concerning the areas which have been in news. So Galwan Valley, Daulat Beg Oldie, Shyok River, Darbuk, Hot Springs, such areas which have been in news like Nakula, etc. You should be clear about their geographical location. Also, boundary protocols and agreements can be asked and one should be clear about it. In mains, a question can be asked on India-China relations, also on the border conflict, the historical aspects, what were the border agreements, how the border talks are going on, and so on. Also, the current conflict can also be asked, so one should be clear about it. And then the questions can be asked on the options available with India, how India should deal with China, a more aggressive China, and what should be India's strategy. So these are the kind of questions on which we should be prepared. So this was all in today's editorial analysis. We'll see you next time with another editorial. Thank you.